Welcome to day 2 at the Optimized AI Conference. My name is Carter Abdallah. I'm a developer tech engineer at NVIDIA. I came to NVIDIA through an acquisition of a company called Brev.dev, where we were a GPU AI dev tool. Now, I'm going to warn you, I did a bit of a bait and switch for this talk because it said when I was given the opportunity to give a talk here, I'm in the thick of it down in Santa Clara at HQ in Silicon Valley, and the space is moving so fast, and my workflows as a developer are changing so rapidly that I knew that by the time I was asked to give a talk here, if I were to write that talk then, it would have already been out of date. And in addition to my life at NVIDIA, I spend a lot of time on social media, particularly talking to the next age of technologists, software developers in that 18 to 24-year-old college range, some of whom I understand are here today. And these are some big questions that they have because of how quickly the world is changing, which is essentially, how do I stay up to date? And so part of that is to actually be a world-class consumer of artificial intelligence, and that's my talk today. Welcome to the era of claws. It was mentioned earlier today, OpenClaw. We recently had a big breakthrough there in personal AI. And so without further ado, let's get started. It's okay to admit some things. The first one is that things are moving really, really fast. I think that a lot of people will try and pretend as if they are fully confident with everything that's happening, and they're always able to stay up to date. And then conversely, there are the people who say, I'm going to sit this one out. Either maybe it's a fad or it's just too scary with how quickly things are moving. I have my workflows. I have how comfortable I am. Number two is that the durable skills are unclear. I mentioned, the college students who are graduating into an environment where AI is moving incredibly fast and seemingly starting to do some of the things that maybe professionals previously did. But this is also true for people who have maybe been in their careers for quite a long time and are now saying, oh, this wealth of experience that I built up over decades, how much of that is going to remain relevant if machines start to do more and more? And then lastly is how to use AI safely. We are, I don't mean this in the sense of, the biases, which we absolutely do need to remove that were talked about this morning, or, leaking sensitive data. What I mean is that these tools, as we give them more autonomy, we've been systematically removing certain barriers that were built up over time, because in order for them to be useful, they do need to have access to stuff. They might need access to your calendar or your email or your bank information. And so as you give it more access, how do you do that in a way that is safe, secure, so that they can be powerful but also safe? How did we get here? Well, we really had this ChatGPT moment that brought artificial intelligence into the general public consciousness in late 2022. Everyone probably remembers that. And, that was really the time when this whole thing kicked off. But as we recall, probably around that time, it was, I wouldn't say it was a toy, but it wasn't as useful as it is today. Fast forward 2 years, and we get the first thinking model. All of a sudden, AI is starting to get smarter. We realize, like humans do, we tend to reason, we tend to think. And if we allow models to think, then we get better answers. And around this time, me as a software engineer, I'm starting to use it more and more for my coding. Now, I'm still writing the code. Maybe I'm using something like autocomplete, but I'm offloading more and more of the things that I used to do to the AI. But then, not even a year later, we have Claude Code kind of really hit the mainstream, the CLI tooling. This is where AI agents are having their moments. The harnesses, which I'll talk about in a bit, start to get really good at the same time that model capabilities are getting far better. And then only a few months after that, we of course have OpenClaw, the open source project that really and truly changed the world. And as you can see, things are getting faster. And so I expect these moments, these big, almost world-changing pivotal moments to start happening. At this point, we might have one, next week, and I expect it to continue accelerating. And so, again, it's okay to admit, hey, that's kind of scary, but what are the things, the qualities, what should my frame of thinking be so that I can remain up to date as the world changes quite fast? Software engineering is the field that was ultimately changed first. So anyone who's a software engineer in the audience or spends a lot of their time coding will understand that their workflow has fundamentally changed. It is completely different than it was 2 or 3 years ago. And personally, I can say that my workflow changes, again, is completely unrecognizable every 3 to 6 months. Andrej Karpathy was one of the founders of OpenAI and kind of a real thought leader in the software engineering space. And he said, "I've never felt this much behind as a programmer." And then at the end of the quote says, "Roll up your sleeves to not fall behind." Why was software engineering first? I think there's a couple reasons. One is that it is verifiable, meaning there is an actually correct answer to the end of the problem. That might be, hey, does this thing compile? If not, keep working. That might be, hey, do these unit tests pass? If not, keep working. If you think about a non-verifiable domain, something like creative writing, it is a lot harder to train the model to just do it correctly because there is no correct answer. But in software, it's very well scoped, it is verifiable, which means we could sort of push the boundaries of the intelligence of the models in this domain further than other industries. Number two, it's economically viable. You know, I'm well paid. I'm a software engineer at NVIDIA. Software engineers tend to be well paid. And additionally, software is one of the highest forms of leverage that humans have ever created. One software engineer can write code that then goes to millions or billions of people. And so naturally, the people who are building these models and the people who are building these tooling, this is quite a valuable problem to solve because if you can produce more software, more high quality software, there's a lot of revenues attached to that. And lastly, software kind of is the gateway to all knowledge work. The $100 trillion+ knowledge work economy that we have is built on the ground, or is built on the foundation of tools like Excel and PowerPoint and email and SQL. And so, as we've already starting to see, you know, once you're able to write good code, you're able to write code that can then use Excel and all of these other tools. And so it is kind of the gateway into many other areas of knowledge work. So models are highly capable, and they have been for some time. But really what's happened in the past couple months is that harnesses have caught up. And so harnesses, I have a little diagram here that I generated, which is, you know, the way to think about a harness, which is really the system around the model or models I have below, that it's not just an LLM, it might be VLM, it might be LLM, it might be a series of LLMs and tools they can access. But all of a sudden, we now have the orchestration around models to make them really quite useful. Some example harnesses, of course, we had Claude Code, and as I mentioned before about software being the gateway to knowledge work, from Anthropic, they actually used Claude Code to build Claude Cowork. And Claude Cowork is kind of the Claude Code for non-technical people, but it is really quite excellent, again, at using software like Excel, managing files on your desktop, doing things that previously, you know, you might have thought, you know, it's really good at coding, but it can't do the other stuff. Cowork can start to do the other stuff. Codex, of course, from OpenAI, Kilo, a sponsor at this conference, Open Code Cursor, and then the one most recently, which I'll spend some more time talking about later, which is OpenClaw. What happened to software engineering will happen to every industry, and to me, that's very exciting. You'll be able to do more with less and faster. Something that I think a lot of people don't spend time thinking about is that software engineering, if you really think about what the role of a software engineer is, it is not to code. The role of a software engineer is not to write code. The role of a software engineer is to solve problems through the medium that is software. And systematically over time, software engineering has moved up the layers of abstraction. The programmers back in the day used to literally punch holes on cards. And then, of course, we get the computer. And then there was assembly. Then we had compiled languages that were closer to English, but still kind of gross to write. Then we have higher levels of abstraction, interpreted languages like Python. Now we're getting really close to English. And now we're really and truly almost at English in terms of how you write code. And now even non-technical people can do it. And so the role of the software engineer has not changed. You're solving problems through software, but the way you do it has. And you are now more leveraged as a human being. Now, what I'm postulating is that this is actually true for a number of domains. It doesn't matter, you know, I have As the speaker Hamza said this morning, I have my mom in the audience. She's a logistics executive. I have my brother who's currently in med school. I've got my friend Eric who's in the movie industry. And the role of those people, the role of a lawyer is not to read documents. The role of an accountant is not to look in Excel or to use Excel. And so as you offload more tasks to the machine, then you can do more with less, and ultimately, I think, have higher throughput. You can get more work done, and it'll be higher quality, which means you as an individual are now higher leverage. You can do more work. So back to point one, things are moving really fast, but you cannot plug your ears and pretend this isn't happening, because it is. It's not a fad. And what would be much more concerning to me is if you plug your ears and 2 years from now you wake up and you feel like there's a world that you don't understand. And so the rest of the talk is going to be giving you the framework to try and make you not feel like that. If you think AI isn't for you or that you don't need it, you're wrong. AI won't replace you, but somebody with AI definitely will. So what can you do? Well, interacting with AI, I think, is fundamentally different than interacting with any piece of software humans are used to. I would venture to guess that most people in the audience, software or otherwise, when you use a product and it doesn't work, you think, it's probably broken, or that might not be the right product for my task, or maybe I need a different vendor. I'll go try somebody else's product. But when you're using these probabilistic, these stochastic systems that are LLMs and ones that are meant to be spoken with in human language, I want to challenge you that when something isn't working for you, when it isn't doing what you were expecting, ask it why. Try and solve the problem together. Have a dialogue with these tools, because what you'll probably find is that actually if it had maybe more context, if it had more tooling, if you had explained the scope of the task better, the tools today actually would be able to accomplish it. And so zero-shot prompting, while is an art form if you're an incredible prompter, is not the way that most people are using these tools today. You really do have an iterative process. So when it can't do something, ask it why. Speak to AI like a human coworker. This is, again, it's natural language. This is something that is great because the barrier to entry to start learning these is zero, because we all speak human language. We all speak natural language. And then lastly is to exercise curiosity and to really have fun with it. I think that the people who are exploring the frontier of what it's capable of today in your workflows, in your daily life, you will run into things where it can't do it. But I would rather you get right up until that point and back off to what it's capable of today, because by tomorrow, it might be capable of doing it. That is much better than staying in your safe bubble of what it was able to do 2 years ago and only using it for that. I want you to constantly be iterating and challenging. Can it do this thing that it couldn't do yesterday? Don't limit yourself to a specific list of tools. This is a big one, because I think a lot of people, if you think about industries of days past, if you were a graphic designer and you learned the Adobe suite of tools, that was really quite a durable list of tools and expertise that you could have for some amount of time. The tools that I spend almost every day in, and most of my day in as a software engineer at NVIDIA today, is changing, as I mentioned, probably every couple months. And so if I were still using the tools that I was using 2 years ago, I would be out of date as a software engineer. And I think that is going to happen again to every industry. And so you need to be as dynamic as possible in your tooling. And same goes for your workflows and your types of prompts and et cetera. Like don't marry or don't get stuck to the things you are doing today. And lastly, don't let yesterday's bias of what AI was capable of limit what you think it's capable of today. Now, if I do my job right, you're going to take these learnings back to your team and continue to explore. And I expect that your productivity will look something like this. So I just want to level set with everybody. A lot of people, I think, will, because many people will act like this thing is magic. It's going to make you super productive overnight. In reality, I think there's a learning curve, like with a lot of things. And so your prompts should start with things now, because you can offload tasks to these models and these tools. Do, make, design, learn, create. Previously, it was who, what, when, where, why. You were asking it a question that would help you while you did the rest of the work. But you can really and truly start to designate entire tasks to these things. They are not search engines, right? So if you're using ChatGPT or Claude Code, like Google, that's okay, right? Like traditional search engines, they are effective in that, in getting real up-to-date answers, but they are also so much more than that. Moving to number 2, as I mentioned, durable skills are unclear, and so especially this goes for the students in the audience. The question then becomes, if you are offloading more tasks to these systems, then what am I good for? Is it just going to eat the world? What are the things I can do to future-proof myself? Now, I'm not going to have a crystal ball, right? I'm not going to pretend to have a crystal ball. And so anybody who tells you this industry is safe and this industry is not, and this one's definitely gone, and these are the tools you need to learn to stay relevant, while they may be well-intentioned and while they may believe that themselves, I think that's the wrong way of looking at it. And so instead, I'm going to offer some qualities that I think are important, really whenever the world is changing quite fast, but especially right now. Up there on the left, we have agility. We've already talked about this one. How quickly can you adopt the new tools as they come out? This goes for both as an individual and as a company. The companies that are, moving the fastest right now are ultimately the ones who are using the best tools to the best of their ability, and that list is changing quite fast. 2 is humility. Process knowledge is a temporary moat. The things that you have built up this decade of experience, they're still are incredibly valuable. But you should use them to leverage yourself with these AI tools. You should teach the AIs how to do the thing that has been taking you a while so that it can do it significantly faster. Leadership. Everyone becomes a manager of agents. Anybody who actually is a people manager knows the importance of scoping tasks, of how to delegate, of when to, delegate versus not delegate, of how to take something over the finish line. And these are all skills that are directly applicable when you are managing, effectively digital coworkers. Curiosity, I've already talked about that one. And then prioritization. When the friction to produce goes down, right, whether that's code or text in the form of a report or images or videos, the risk of slop, if you hear the term AI slop, comes up, right? Because you can almost turn off the critical thinking part of your brain if you're not careful and produce a fantastic amount of work, but the density of how good that work is has gone down. And so now you're producing, really long emails that it summarized for you, that it wrote for you, instead of the short, succinct one you used to write. So I encourage you to still prioritize. Do not let the friction of producing going down to 0 mean that all of a sudden you are more prolific, but you are less dense in the quality of work that you are producing. Now, with all of these qualities and everything up until this point, I want to move to the current frontier. Now again, things change rapidly, but what happened in really January of this year up until now is the era of claws, right? OpenClaw. And OpenClaw is, well, actually, you know what? Let's play a video and let me show you.
open source project just dropped.
Andre Karpathy has just launched something called The Research is a Huge Deal.
You give an AI agent a task, go to sleep, it runs 100 experiments overnight, keeping what works and killing what doesn't.
I really love what my stuff enables that person to do. And we had like one guy, he told me like he installed it at his 60-year-old dad and like they made beer, connected the machine via Bluetooth to OpenClaw. And then we automated everything, including the whole website for people to order.
Lobsterlager fertig sein.
Everyone is talking about OpenClaw.
OpenClaw. We want to build OpenClaw with OpenClaw.
What is OpenClaw?
Hundreds of people are queuing up for lobsters in Shenzhen.
Believe it or not, there's already a Claude Code.
So OpenClaw has been described as the ChatGPT moment for autonomous, self-evolving agents. It's an open source project, and it did what took Linux 30 years to do in just a few weeks, becoming the most starred open source project on GitHub in history. The adoption is absolutely insane. Funny story about the demo there. The graph itself was built by Claude, that animation that you saw going by. The demos in there were real, right? We actually taught OpenClaw how to use some of the softwares within NVIDIA to generate synthetic data for autonomous vehicles. That lobster logger, right? He hooked it up to a brewing system. It did make that website. And so it can feel almost like fantasy, but we really and truly are in this era if you know how to leverage these tools. So agents are, the new computing platform. If you think about what Claw is, it has access to, your files, computer use, tools, memory, LLMs, sub-agents, skills, and that's where the term harness, right, that bubble around it is effectively the harness, OpenClaw being the one we're discussing right now. And that really has unlocked new capabilities. We were interacting with Claw using an I/O of a messaging platform, whether that's Discord or Telegram. Some more quick anecdotes about how I've seen people using Claws, how I personally use it myself. I use it as like my own personal EA. I think that's a great one for getting started. When I was preparing for this speech, I'm talking back and forth with it over Discord. It manages my calendar. When we moved the session today, I'm telling it, hey, can you move the session on my calendar? It has its own email, its own calendar that it sends me invites from. And so I all of a sudden have, instead of a human assistant, I now have my own digital one, and we can all have that regardless of who you are. I've seen people use it as sales leads in their small businesses where they have it effectively building its own CRM, custom built to their business, where as an email comes in, it qualifies the lead, it'll reach out if it needs, it applies for sponsorships for his content. My favorite one is the home assistant, where there was an engineer at NVIDIA who has it hooked up to everything at his home. It's all running locally, and so it has access to his doorbell, his security system, his water and gas meters, and he went on vacation. And it's reading all of this data all the time, and it says, well, in 72 hours, the security system at your house has remained armed, your security cameras have detected no movement, and yet your water has been running. I think you have a leak, because nobody's home and the water's running. It can reason, right? And through these continuous data streams. And then it went just one step further. And it said, do you want me to reach out to your landscaper? It went through his contact list. It found his landscaper's contact. And it said, here's the email I would send to the landscaper to come out and check if there's a leak. He's on vacation. He says, yeah, sure. Landscaper comes. Sure enough, there was a leak. And so hands off, he now has, not just a smart home, he's got a really smart home. He's got a smart home that's thinking and acting on his behalf. And again, this sounds almost like science fiction, but we are here. Now, the thing is, you do have to know how to use them. And if you think about what I just said, right, what is a claw? It has access to sensitive data. It can act autonomously. It can basically write and execute its own code. And then it can externally communicate. Well, That's a pretty dangerous thing, right? They call it the lethal trifecta, because you can imagine if you have access to sensitive data, you can write and execute code, and you can communicate externally. There are some pretty nasty things that can happen. And so you only want to give access to agents, any kind of agents, to two of those three things at the same time, which is why NVIDIA has been working on a product called NVIDIA OpenShell. Now, we're effectively enforcing at each of the three enforcement points the things I just mentioned. So the sandbox to only give it access to the files you want. A policy engine that is making sure that it can only reach, it can only externally communicate to areas that you yourself approve, and then a privacy router to make sure that the sensitive data that it has, it'll use a local LLM first if it can, and only reach out for frontier intelligence if it really needs to. Now, this is the overall diagram. Again, I'm not going to go through this in great detail. We call the secured OpenClaw with NVIDIA OpenShell, we call that NemoClaw. And so we'll be doing some work on this in the workshop later this evening so that you can have your own safe, secure personal agent if you are interested. But I like this diagram more. I think this is really what you're talking about, right? You're putting your long-running, self-evolving agents into a sandbox that you yourself control. You're not letting them run absolutely wild. So I know I'm coming up on time here. If you want to put into practice what we talked about here, the qualities that are needed to help you stay relevant, the current frontier, actually putting that into practice, then please come to my workshop at Salon F at 2:30 p.m. I think I'm right on that, where we will be essentially exploring together. The goal I wanted is that you leave this room right now with ideas buzzing about, yeah, that thing sounds really interesting. I think I could use that for my business or in my personal life. And then at 2:30, you come and we actually start putting that into practice. And then hopefully, if I do my job right, then you actually leave and you cannot stop thinking about it. And you start talking with your claw nonstop. That's what I do. My family can say, I'm talking to my claw more than I'm talking to them. I say that as a joke, but in reality, it's a net new kind of thing to experience, that you have this personal, essentially digital worker who's ready to do whatever you want, whenever you want, and bounce ideas off each other and build things together. It's really quite fun. And so hopefully you leave the workshop with that same experience. So thank you so much, guys. Come to the Salon F workshop at 2:30 p.m.